Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
Alex.
Alex, we are full steam ahead on this football season as week 5 is over. Sadly, the football season is going really, really fast. But on a happier note, to our listeners, as always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please subscribe to us on the socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and Threads with the handle at N2EFantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
Today's episode is a recap of week 5. We'll go over the injuries. We'll go over any breakouts. We'll go over any changing of the guards. Let's go ahead and do this episode. Our takeaways from week 5, and we can start with the Thursday night game, Bears at Washington. Jeff, what was interesting about this game to you?
This went exactly how we thought it would go, right?
Well, I mean, I did hedge and say, don't count the Bears out, but we did think Washington was going to win, and it was a complete disaster on their side. So, Bears snuck away with a win on this one. They were desperate to break that streak. They didn't want to go 0-15. So,
Is this the
they,
6th or the 7th Justin Fields victory?
I think it's the 7th, but
I
it's
think
the
so
first of
too.
this year.
Yes, and it's a big deal. Your guy that you do have in a dynasty league, DJ Moore, blew up in this game, and he's the one that really stood out to me as a breakout candidate. Fields was the beneficiary of good yards after the catch from Moore, but I know in the preseason they did say that they wanted to start hitting more quick hits with Fields and the receivers so they could get the yards after the catch. But the Bears kind of ran out of running backs during this game.
Yeah, they had one running back on the bench who wasn't active, but they had both Roshan, who went out with a concussion, and Khalil Herbert, who hurt his knee or ankle in this one. They basically had to use their fullback Passenger as a running back in this game just to be able to run some plays. So it was pretty much all DJ Moore from that point, and he looked uncoverable. Looked like the first round corner that Washington grabbed this recent draft wasn't able to cover him at all, and he just looked unstoppable. And that was very apparent to anyone who watched the game or started or played against DJ Moore in any of your matchups.
Absolutely. But what was really surprising about this matchup, like DJ Moore, we've seen this before from him. He's blown up in games before. Hopefully he can continue that going. But Washington kind of abandoned the run in this game. And you could say it is because they were in comeback mode the entire second half. But I don't know if that is necessarily true because they were only down 7 in the late third, early fourth quarter. And they had 51 passes. That is not really striving for balance at all. And it is something that they're really going to have to work on, especially with a guy like Brian Robinson, who I think only had like 6 or 7 carries. That's not really enough to like get your run game going. Like that's normally like a starter. Sam Howell, I think going forward, is a bye week fill-in at quarterback. He's probably a top 15 option at this point just because of the way that they use him and the way that he throws the ball. Just hopefully he can stay healthy the entire year because he is the most sacked quarterback in the league right now.
Yeah, I would say Sam Howell is top 15 during the bye weeks and top 20 for the year. I think that would be fair to say. What was concerning for me, besides the apocalypse for the running backs for Chicago, is that Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are just not getting enough targets. This week was the Logan Thomas show. He got the majority of the targets, and Curtis Samuel looks like he's taken over as the wide receiver 1 for this team, which is very surprising. I know in years past, Curtis Samuel was always a sleeper darling for whatever team he was on, and now it seems like it's come into fruition. So if he's on anyone's free agent wire, go ahead and pick him up. He probably is on a lot of waiver wires right now. So I know I picked him up before the game in one league that I was desperate for a wide receiver spot, and I'm trying to pick him up in another league, but I doubt I'll end up getting him.
Yeah, tight ends a wasteland, and Logan Thomas is someone that you can scoop up to for a dart throw.
Yep, I agree, but I am impressed with Chicago for pivoting and finally sculpting an offense around Justin Fields' strengths. Justin Fields was a little bit quicker with his reads and his throws, although still looked slow when you're watching the game. Still looked like he's still half a second or full second off from when he should be throwing the ball. But essentially, DJ Moore just helped him out tremendously. Like you said, a lot of his yardage came after the catch and on explosive plays and broken coverages. So that kind of inflated Fields' numbers. I would expect and hope that Justin Fields continues to improve, although he may end up just not good enough by the end of the year. But we'll see if he can continue to make strides.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully they can put it together 2 weeks in a row. And we will review that game in our next episode. Moving on to our London game, where I woke up really early and made breakfast for the household. We watched the Jaguars at the hometown Buffalo Bills, and the Jaguars did look fresher in London. They were there the entire week because they played back-to-back games in London, and I do expect teams to do this going forward. Like, I expect teams to play one home game and one road game going forward, at least one team per year, maybe even the Jaguars every year. But ETN looked great. What did you think about Buffalo this week in London?
Well, I thought it was interesting, both the London game and the Thursday night game, the team that was overwhelmingly favored and bet on by like 90%, both those teams lost. So Washington and Buffalo both lost. That was very weird for me that everyone seemed to be very wrong about these matchups. And it's concerning for me that Buffalo just completely abandoned their run game as well. You would like to think that these running backs, so like James Cook, Tavis Murray, Damian Harris, they should have gotten more run plays and maybe balanced it out, especially since they were relatively close to the Jaguars, so there's no reason for them to have abandoned the run game that early and have Josh Allen throw 40 times. But yeah, it looks bad on that front. However, Gabe Davis, I think, has solidified himself as the number 2 option in the receiving game. He's put together several good weeks this year, which is more consistent than he's been in years past. I think he's an every week wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. So that was one good thing to come in this game, but a complete dud for James Cook this week. Still haven't seen much of Tank Bigsby on the Jaguars side. It looked like it was 90% ETN in this matchup. And Calvin Ridley had a bounce back week, which was nice. So that was good. And Christian Kirk still is very effective. Evan Ingram is a distant third option right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you had mentioned, Gabe Davis, he is in a contract year. So this shouldn't be too surprising. We've seen this before. Player enters a contract year and then they ball out. They actually put it all together. Gabe Davis is doing that. He is very clearly the number 2, but it does look like they have been peppering in Hardy and also Kier as well. So those are just names to keep in the background of your mind as we watch and see if anything happens to anyone that is currently a Buffalo Bills wide receiver. I did notice that Stephon Diggs had a little bit of an outburst on the sideline. And the outburst obviously is about him not getting the ball, which is totally fine because we know that it works with the alpha receivers more times than not. But again, going back to my earlier concern in the offseason, him doing that makes Josh Allen force him the ball. And when you're forcing him the ball like that, you're going to make mistakes. And he threw a pick like pretty much on the next drive after Diggs threw that fit. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. This is why I don't like when quarterbacks force the ball to wide receivers. Other than that, Allen's been very mistake-free this year. The only time that he is when he's forcing the ball to Diggs after Diggs chirps a little bit. So kind of an interesting dynamic there right now, but I do expect them to right the ship this week back at home against the Giants. But moving on to another week.
I just want to add something.
Yeah.
I just want to ask. So, are we completely out on Dalton Kincaid at this point, or are we still hoping that he does something this year?
He'll do something this year. I just think that it's taking him a little bit of time to get used to it, and he also is splitting time with Knox, which is very annoying, but very predictable entering this year. So he's not a guy like Laporta that has the entire tight end room to himself, basically. Laporta is actually balling out. But I do expect Kincaid to get more opportunities probably after the bye week. I would assume they would make those changes.
Okay. All right. Now let's move on to the AFC North matchup here. The Baltimore Ravens at the Steelers. And my gosh, did the Steelers pull off an upset win? Ugly upset win, but still a win. Jeff, what do you make of this matchup?
Man, we could go rewind the tape from last week and see that I said that this has a potential to be a low-scoring game. This was one of the lowest-scoring games of the entire week. And Pittsburgh pulls it out because it was low-scoring. So I did think that Pittsburgh had a shot in this game. But I don't know if you saw the video, but Matt Canada did not look happy on the game-winning touchdown throw from Pickens to Pickett to Pickens. Yep, I got it the wrong way, but because it looked like that was not the play that he had called. So there is video of Canada not being happy about that touchdown. Kind of interesting to see that at the home games in Pittsburgh. There is Fire Canada chants all the time. I think once you get to this point of a fan base being this disgruntled with a coach, it's probably better to just move on from the coach, even if he's a decent coach at that point. Because at the end of the day, they're really putting out a product for their fans right now. And this really isn't happening at this time. They just got lucky pulling out a win, and we'll get to why they were a little bit lucky here in a second. But the other Steelers thing that I noticed, like this was reverse of last week, where Harris outperformed Warren. This week, Warren outperformed Harris. So it does seem like that's going to go back and forth, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be a leader in the clubhouse anytime soon there, and it's just going to frustrate fantasy owners back there because one's going to take away from the other's workload and then may even have a bad week on top of that. But as I said, with Baltimore, Flowers had some pretty bad drops. So Lamar really needs some receiving help. He needs a steady number one receiver, one that'll catch the ball, one that'll stay on the field. Mark Andrews typically is that, but he has not performed up to that level this year so far. But Flowers really needs to hone his craft. He could really take over this receiver room right now, year one, and it's up to him to put in the work to get to that point, and hopefully he does.
So this was the third matchup in a row where it's almost 90% of people bet on the Ravens, and the Ravens ended up losing. So again, the masses were wrong again, and we were right there with them in this case. But apparently, it was very windy and the ball kept drifting. But Lamar Jackson went against a defense that pressures the quarterback very well with TJ Watt, and Lamar Jackson crumbles under pressure. So whenever he's hurried, whenever he's pressured, he makes bad decisions and bad throws. It doesn't help that receivers drop the ball. I was concerned that with Odell Beckham Jr. coming back this week, he might eat into Zay Flowers' target share. That wasn't the case. He's still the number one target, and he's even edging out Mark Andrews in that regard, which is nice to see for at least Flowers. Again, pitiful rushing on both teams. So Gus Edwards only got 48 yards off of 12 rushes, and then you look at Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris; they didn't do much on the ground either. I think I disagree with you that I think Jaylen Warren has been overall the better all around running back just because he brings so much more on the passing game. Yes, Najee can pass a little bit, or can catch, I should say, a little bit, but Warren is better at it than he is. Warren has fresher legs. He's a little bit quicker. Najee is more of a bulky, strong back, which can have its uses, but right now he hasn't been very efficient. They haven't been able to get anything going on the ground, and that's kind of concerning. Whereas Baltimore, I think it's more to do with Lamar Jackson's rushing ability himself that is preventing some of these running backs from putting up big numbers. Both those teams have to work on those issues. To me, it doesn't seem like the Ravens have gotten better overall in their play calling or their schemes. Doesn't seem like the new offensive coordinator has done what fans hoped they would do and open up the pass game more. So I'm concerned that neither one of these teams are very creative. They're not setting up the quarterbacks to succeed. They don't have the ground game going. But fortunately for both these teams, they do have a wide receiver that's showing out pretty much every week now. And that's Zay Flowers for Baltimore and George Pickens for Pittsburgh. George Pickens demolished all the secondary that the Ravens threw out against him. He made plays left and right, even on tight coverage. So that's very impressive. Hopefully, they can get rid of Matt Canada because I think Kenny Pickett, his year is salvageable, and I think him going rogue is a huge indictment to Matt Canada because he went rogue, but he got the touchdown, which to me means Kenny Pickett was correct. If he got the touchdown on that play, then he was the one that was correct. So that's just my thought there. I'm hoping in a couple weeks that Deontay Johnson is back, and that helps out Kenny Pickett and the Steelers offense more. But good for them for earning this tough victory.
Yeah, and it lends some hope to Kenny Pickett and his career that he can make decisions like this when he's actually the one making the decisions. So just something to think about. Nothing that we need to make decisions on right now, but just something to think about.
Let's move on to your Carolina Panthers at the Detroit Lions. Jeff, I will let you start this one out.
Oh boy. So this was not a great game for me. But Bryce Young does continue to improve, and we definitely underrated Adam Thielen this year. Um, we thought going from Minnesota to a rookie quarterback with Bryce Young that that there was going to be some issues or some drop off or some aging that was going to happen with Thielen. We were wrong with that. We definitely should have had him higher. Probably should have been a fourth or a fifth round pick as opposed to like an eighth, ninth, 10th round pick. That is something that we'll continue to monitor this year. I do think that there is one thing that's missing in Bryce Young's repertoire, and that is a run game. We did hear very early on, I'm not sure if you heard about this or if we even talked about it, but Carolina was in on Jonathan Taylor, at least slightly, because I do think that they were trying to get a run game going for Bryce Young. He doesn't have that right now. Sanders has been hurt. Chuba Hubbard hasn't been able to really step into that role. That's a big problem for a rookie quarterback right now. We cannot get the run game going, and it does not seem like there's an end in sight there. But on the flip side, it does not look like Goff needs a specific wide receiver such as St. Brown anymore. He relied on Reynolds and Laporta plenty in this game, and I think Laporta is a must start, but I also believe David Montgomery, completely underrated him as well. He is a must start going forward. And I didn't see that coming, but this is turning into a bit of a trend with Dan Campbell and his offense that he likes that big running back. And last year was Jamal Williams. This year was David Montgomery. So, and then the more shiny weapon such as Swift and Gibbs, they get kind of pushed to the wayside a little bit. But those were my big takeaways from this game. The Lions seem to be legit, and they'll only get better as St. Brown comes back and Jameson Williams gets some playing time under his belt.
Well, Jeff. You finally come around on David Montgomery. It's interesting what a running back can do when he gets behind an offensive line that can actually run block instead of being stuck on a bad Chicago team. So it's almost like an improved situation helped him showcase the talent he already had. So I like David Montgomery. I think I was in on him in my top running back positions before the year started. I've been a big fan of him. I think he got done dirty by how bad and incompetent Chicago has been the last several years. It's nice to see him succeed. He has had a hyper efficient metric for short yardage runs and red zone runs as well. So I know that Williams did well last year, and it was an insane target to get as many touchdowns as he did. But I think David Montgomery can equal that. I think it's certainly possible. So as long as he stays healthy for the rest of the year. But I think he's been very crucial for Detroit. I think Gibbs isn't quite an all-around running back yet, and he has elements of his game that he needs to work through, and hopefully he comes back and helps balance David Montgomery going forward. But I really like the Lions. Every week I feel more secure and good about my decision to pick them to win the NFC, especially with the Cowboys losing, and we can talk about that later. But I really like the Lions this year. I agree with you that Goff is making it work with whoever he throws out there or throws to in this instance. But hopefully Amon-Ra St. Brown's back, and that just gives him another boost. On the Panthers side, I thought when you were talking about Bryce Young, the only thing he's missing, I was about to say height, because
That's
I
not
think it would
nice.
help him. I think it would help him see the field better, as well as give him leverage to throw higher in the air and get a little bit further. He had some brutal picks. He had more plays that should have been picks, but he also had a couple nice throws. One of which he threw right into the receiver's hands, and yes, the receiver had a defender hit him, but it went right in his hands. It should have been a touchdown, and the receiver dropped it. So I can see why they're looking for another receiver. Adam Thielen, yes, he's been performing. He's more of a possession guy than he is a field stretcher. He's a savvy veteran, but he's not super athletic, and he's not necessarily a red zone type target. So you want another wide receiver to balance off with him. And right now, eventually they're going to figure out how to scheme Thielen out if no one else contributes. So that would be helpful to get another wide receiver. I think their running back situation's okay. Yes, Miles Sanders got a fumble, and I think they relied on Chuba Hubbard a little bit more at that point, but they're just not consistent with it. They're not able to get their run blocking down. They're another one of these teams that struggle with run blocking, and only a handful of running backs can make up for poor blocking. So it's not a feat that is easily overcome. And I know we like to think that every position. Like the top guys are just superhuman, but a lot of times they benefit from a good run blocking scheme or just good run blocking linemen that really help them out. So they're missing a few pieces. I still think that they will get a win at some point. I don't think that they'll end up a bottom team, but right now they're still struggling to put everything together.
Completely agree. And I don't really have much more to say about this, but you were right about Montgomery. Now we switch over to your team here and we get to discuss that, where the Texans were at the Atlanta Falcons. I'll let you go ahead and get kicked off with that one.
Yeah, we're continuing on with the theme of teams that are unable to get anything going on the ground game, and that's in this case the Houston Texans have still struggled to run the football. So that's one thing that could have helped them in this matchup to take more possession time and keep the ball away from the Falcons. But they've been hyper inefficient about that. It is strange to me that Devin Singletary didn't even get a rush, as far as I can tell, in this game. It was pretty much all Dameon Pierce with Tank Dell mixing in a couple times, which I'm not sure that I would use Tank Dell in that situation. He's not as sturdy as Deebo Samuel is. I know they're trying to emulate the 49ers offense, but they're not quite there. Dalton Schultz did show up very well. I think he is of the tight end 2 conversation, so potentially a bye week fill in for tight end for you out there. Tank Dell, I think, is still putting in salvageable weeks, but you have to consider him as a wide receiver 3 or flex. Nico Collins had a down game this week. I expect him to bounce back next week. John Mechie has just been non-existent this year, and I pretty much expect that to continue. I think he's still getting himself up to full game speed after missing all of last year due to illness. The Falcons, on the other hand, they are usually able to put up a decent ground game. This time, not so much. So that tells you that the Texans have improved their defense. However, Kyle Pitts finally had a decent week. So I think that's encouraging for him. I still don't buy that he's 100% back. So I need to see him do more before I announce he's back and he's okay to start on a weekly basis. Drake London is still like wide receiver 3 flex territory. I still don't feel good about him. But Jonnu Smith has been consistent the last few weeks. So I feel like Jonnu Smith is another guy that's at the top of like the tight end 2 conversation by week filler. So he's a guy that you can throw out there, maybe even a tight end 1, which is more of an indictment of the tight end situation all around right now. But both these teams are, in my opinion, very similar. They're middling teams. I don't think either team's going to make the playoffs, but they do show signs of life. They do have a lot of young weapons and a improving defense. So these are 2 teams to watch in the next couple of years to potentially show up in the playoffs.
I completely agree. I do like the strides that Stroud's taking. Try to say that 10 times fast. And I like his no INT streak, which is actually really impressive. It will end at some point, so we just need to wait for it to end, but it will end at some point. But did you know that Ritter was undefeated at home before reading it here? He's undefeated in college and the NFL at home.
Interesting.
Yep.
So maybe they just need to get another quarterback for the away games.
Yes. So it's and then London and Pitt show up together this time. Like they got enough targets, they got enough catches to actually be productive, but then Bijan falls off.
Yeah.
So I do think that Bijan at the end of the year, we're going to look back and say a first round pick was too hefty for a rookie running back where we didn't know anything about him. But that was where you had to take him if you did want any shares of Bijan. And then Pierce is on pace for 840 yards, Alex. I know you told me 1,300 was going to be where he is about, but it does not seem like he's on pace to get there. And it's really disappointing to see that they also don't have the run game going to help their rookie quarterback, kind of like the Panthers do not have their run game going for the rookie quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. I think Dameon Pierce, though, will have a week where he gets 500 yards and he makes up the difference.
500 yards, got it.
If Achane can do it, Dameon Pierce can do it. No, I'm just kidding.
Right?
I do expect him at some point to bounce back, but no, I don't think he's going to hit that 1,300 yards mark either way. Right now, he has an outside chance to get like 1,100 plus. So I hope that he can turn it around, that they can figure out a scheme where he can bust loose. Otherwise, it's going to be a disappointing year on the ground. He might make some of it up in the air. We'll see. I'm not giving up hope on him yet.
You can't, not yet.
But we can move on to the New Orleans Saints at the New England Patriots. And my, are the Patriots completely in shambles. Looks like they've officially given up on Mac Jones, but I don't think Bailey's happy is the answer either. Jeff, what do you feel about this matchup?
So unless I've missed it, they really haven't said anything about who the starting quarterback is going to be going forward. They definitely benched Mac Jones back to back weeks. At some point, they're going to have to move off of him and see what else they have. But just some interesting pieces here of what's happening in a post Brady world for New England. I don't honestly know where they move forward with this. Maybe they need to go find a quarterback on the waiver wire like Carson Wentz to lead them for the rest of the year. Like, I don't know what the answer is here. Maybe stranger things have happened. Maybe a Wentz Belichick world works for both of them. And it does blow my mind that someone with Carson Wentz's talent isn't at least a backup in this league right now. And some people are upset about the his attitude and stuff, but I can't really see that being this big of a hindrance unless he's done something unforgivable. And I'm assuming we would have heard about that. So I guess I'm not really understanding that. So I guess that might be an option for here. But switching over to the Saints side, Kamara looked good. He's mostly back, and he is a must start going forward. So congratulations to people that weathered the 3 weeks of him being suspended. And I do expect him to get better and better, especially as Carr gets healthier and healthier, and the throwing game, the passing game gets to be more of a threat. I think that hampers a little bit of Kamara right now, as the throwing game isn't as big of a threat right now. Olave was outperformed by Thomas, but Olave got the touchdown. Do you think Olave was overdrafted? I think he was a second rounder when all was said and done last month in drafts. So is there anything that I'm missing from this game? I mean, it was an onslaught, a shutout by the Saints.
So I will just say for the Saints side, I agree. Alvin Kamara is an every week must start. As far as Olave, I mean, the first 3 weeks he looked like he was earning that high draft mark because he was getting 10, 11 targets each week, getting 6 or 8 catches, 112 yards, 86 yards, 104 yards. But the last 2 weeks he's completely dropped off the map. Granted, Carr has not been throwing the ball very much in those games, or at least last week he just wasn't efficient because he was hurt. This week he didn't throw nearly as much. They relied mostly on the ground game, which is totally fair when you're demolishing the other team and your defense is playing well. So I think Olave is still, in my opinion, a wide receiver 2. I think that's disappointing for some people who drafted him as a wide receiver 1, but I think the reality is he's a wide receiver 2, and I think he will have more big weeks to come. I feel bad for anyone who wasted their waiver wire budget on Kendrick Bourne because he's done nothing since his one big week. And I don't think I see a path for any of these guys other than Hunter Henry to bounce back. Ramondre Stevenson and Zeke Elliott have both been disappointing the last several weeks, and that's very concerning. But that's when you don't have quarterback play, everyone's just going to stack the box, and that's just the reality of where they're at right now. I could see them trading for a quarterback, or I could see them just being bad and trying to draft a quarterback early in this next draft. So, I mean, they could trade for someone. I mean, they'd have to work out the financials. It'd have to be realistic, but I could see them trading for someone like Kyler Murray if Arizona wants to roll with Dobbs because Dobbs has been playing well for them, or the reverse when Kyler Murray comes back. I could see Arizona trading a now valuable Dobbs to a team that needs a better quarterback. So you can kind of see it go either way. Tannehill is an option for people at some point, I would imagine, and Kirk Cousins if the Vikings give up on the season and Kirk Cousins agrees to a trade because he does have a no trade clause, I could see him going to a new team, although I don't think he'd go to New England at this point.
Right. Absolutely. I guess the question is does Bill Belichick get another stab at this? Or is this the end of Bill Belichick in New England? And that is kind of what the interesting piece of this is, and who has the power in this relationship between Kraft and Belichick. Or, I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, Kraft is going to have the power of that, but is Kraft still giving Bill Belichick free reign of this franchise, or is Kraft saying, no, you cannot make moves anymore without clearing them through me, and Kraft is going to start doing what's in the best interest of the franchise?
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting because they have a really good relationship. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to start souring quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the Giants at the Dolphins, and Sorry, folks, we cannot report that the Giants beat the Dolphins. This just has been a brutal year for them, and it continues to be brutal. One thing I've been surprised about, though, is I feel like Miami, although I think they are running a lot of plays, it doesn't feel like they're running a lot of plays. They've just been hyper efficient and very explosive, and it's nice for anyone who has any of these players on their team. But man, do you feel terrible about anyone on the Giants right now? And Jeff, how do you feel? One on both sides, like Dr. Jackal and Mr. Hyde kind of situation with these two teams, polar opposite seasons right now and going in polar opposite directions. How do you feel about these two teams?
So the Giants are just a tire fire right now, and it's not just Daniel Jones. I know I'm going to blame a lot of this on Daniel Jones, but it's not just him. The coaching hasn't been great. The receiving core hasn't been great. They still don't have a guy for Jones to target all of the time. Waller was usable in this game, so that is one bright side of this, and it does appear that Saquon Barkley will be pretty close, if not fully back next game. But on the flip side, the Dolphins, they all seem usable as long as they are healthy, and I say that because Devin Achane is not healthy any longer. He seems to be going on the IR with a knee injury, but he is getting a second opinion before that does happen. If that does happen, Wilson will be back. You fire up Mostert because he is a must start, and you fire up Wilson because he will be the person taking the Achane role going forward.
Jeff Wilson,
And
not Cedric.
correct. They have all
There's
the
just a
Wilsons,
million
I guess.
Wilsons. Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Wilson. We have a situation here where it'll be interesting to see how much Achane misses, given if it's more than 4 weeks, this does become more concerning for him going forward in future years. If it's 4 weeks and he's back and we forget about this and he's never injured again this year, then he might even enter a first round pick conversation next year. I'm not sure that he'll make it, but he might enter that conversation, especially if he picks up where he left off. And then lastly, Tua had some really boneheaded mistakes in this game. This game should have been a blowout. This shouldn't have been close. A pick six made it closer than it was. And that was the Giants' first half touchdown this year. Came off of a pick six. We're 5 games in, folks, and that's not good. So, and that's not all on Jones. That's on coaching because the first few drives should be scripted. Basically, they're not scripting them out appropriately for Jones, and Jones isn't applying the script well either. Barkley will be back. That will help. But fire up all of your Dolphins, whoever's starting. The Giants are looking terrible. So we'll talk about who to start in this next matchup against the Bills a little bit later on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when it comes to Tua because he's averaging almost 72% accuracy with his passes, but he's also on pace to have the most interceptions he's ever had in a season as well. So it's kind of weird to be in that situation when he makes a mistake. It's a bad one, it seems like. So, but he is on pace to have an insane amount of yardage by the time the year's over, too. He's averaging 323 yards per game 5 weeks into the season, and he is looking phenomenal for the most part. But again, he is one of these shorter quarterbacks, and I think that that comes into play as well. A lot of his mistakes are anticipating routes rather than actually seeing things play out. So he throws it where he thinks the receiver is going to be, and sometimes if the receiver doesn't run the right route, he's not going to be there, and the defender will be. So that's one element to his game that's a big problem. I don't think that they'll miss Devon Achane that much because Raheem Mostert is a very similar back in a lot of regards. Jeff Wilson is going to be a good guy to mix in. He's someone people should be picking up off the waiver wire if he is there. But I don't think the team's really going to miss that much of a beat without Achane. The Giants, however, are in complete shambles. They refuse to use Jalen Hyatt, who is the one player who can make a difference for them at this point, because he's the only field stretcher that they have on their entire team. I just think that team, like you said, they're pretty much a dumpster fire. They're pretty much a tire fire at this point, and I don't see them getting better until they change things up.
No, and I completely agree with you there. And I don't know what that in-season changeup looks like. Is it trading for one of the Broncos' wide receivers? What is it that could spur this change that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anyone available right now that would make a difference.
Absolutely. So that moves on to our next game here where we have the Titans and the Colts. And thank goodness the Colts went out and got Gardner Minshew because he's the only quarterback that can make it through a game for the Indianapolis Colts. He's made it through 5, and Richardson's made it through 1 because Anthony Richardson is injured again. There is a consideration that he is going to go on the injured reserve list and miss at least 4 games with a grade 3 AC joint, which does not sound good at all. I think Carr's was a grade 1 or a grade 2 AC joint. So that's just for context purposes. It is concerning that he's only started and finished 1 out of 5 games so far. It is becoming a trend. And a lot of it, and at least the first game and this game, it's because he thought that he could run over defenders. And he's a quarterback in the National Football League against professional athletes. He needs to do better at getting out of the way, sliding, protecting himself, because availability, I do believe, is a skill. I don't believe in injury prone as like a label, but I do believe in availability being a skill. And being available to your team is one of the most impressive and useful traits that one can have. I'll let you pick up on Anthony Richardson because I know you completely disagree with me on the Anthony Richardson front. But for me, this is concerning, and I would like to see if this is going to be a trend going forward or not.
So I think that the coaching staff has to do a better job at protecting Anthony Richardson, and I think that play was a scripted play where he was running. I think that he hasn't learned how to fall or how to take a tackle or how to avoid certain situations, which he doesn't have a lot of playing experience in college, so he'll learn that.
It's hard
I
to
think
learn
that
that on the sideline
yeah, it is, but
and in a
I think
sling.
it's only year 1. He's one of the youngest quarterbacks in the league right now. So I think that he'll get there. And I think that he lets them do more elements that Gardner Minshew can't. Their play action ability is much higher when Anthony Richardson's out there. They run more play action. It's more effective as well. It's not as effective with Gardner Minshew, and they don't call it as much with Gardner Minshew. I think Gardner Minshew is a game manager quarterback. I think right now he's been very efficient. I don't expect that to last. I think that they're going to struggle against the Jaguars and they're going to struggle against other teams relying on Gardner Minshew. I think it's going to be similar to Baltimore, and I don't think that the Jaguars are as vulnerable as Baltimore is right now with how banged up they've been on the defense and the offensive line. I do think that Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor will benefit because they won't have a rushing quarterback stealing their yardage. So those are guys to benefit. I think Josh Downs has been improving, and he's had a couple good weeks in a row. So I like that. I think Pittman hopefully will get more yardage with Minshew over the next few weeks. But ultimately, I don't really see the downside to Richardson missing time right now, especially in his rookie season. I think he's played a little bit. He'll get time to digest a little bit. I think he'll eventually be out there. But I want Gardner Minshew to show if he actually deserves a starting job, and he'll get probably 4 weeks in a row, most likely, because I think the most likely outcome is Richardson goes on IR. I don't really see him not, and I don't see a reason for him not to, because I don't think this team's going to make the playoffs. I think that they will lean on Gardner Minshew, and maybe he'll be someone that they could trade in the offseason for a decent package. But ultimately, I think he limits the Colts' options, although he's efficient. On the other hand, I think that the Tennessee Titans are another really bad team, although it was very nice to see DeAndre Hopkins look good in a game and actually break over 100 yards receiving. Hopefully that continues. The Titans were a little bit better in pass protection, so I think they've improved there. However, Derrick Henry couldn't get anything going on the ground. I think Derrick Henry has looked slow. I think that he keeps getting stopped at the line several times. His longest breakout in this game was 8 yards, which the Colts don't have the worst defense, but their defense isn't exactly spectacular either. Tyjae Spears looks like a much more efficient back. He brings more in the receiving game as well. So I can see that Derrick Henry, in my opinion, his time is limited with the Titans. I don't think he gets another contract there. So that's something I'd keep an eye on. And if they lose more games and look like they're on the outside of the playoff run, which I anticipate they will be, I could see them trading Tannehill and Henry at some point.
Okay. Do you think they fall out of the playoff contention before the trade deadline? Because that is one of the issues of the trade deadline being so early in the season, is that they may not be out of contention before the trade deadline hits.
What is it, week 9?
Yeah, I'll look up the exact date here in a second. I disagree with you on the Henry front. Henry has always been a second half running back. He wears down the team. Right around carry 15, 16, 17, he can burst one out. and he's always done this year after year. They're not using him enough to really grind out a defense right now, and that is concerning. DeAndre Hopkins is back. Like, I don't know how else to say that. Like, you said that he was going to a wasteland in Tennessee, and he's a guy that can still get separation. He can still get catches, yards, touchdowns, everything, and he is the guy that they are targeting 100% right now, first read. But the NFL trade deadline, going back to that, is October 31st, which is only 3 weeks away. So I just don't think that lends for a lot of teams to fall out of it. And we will get to a team a little bit later where I will think that they will fall out of it in time for them to be able to trade. We didn't mention yet, but Jonathan Taylor did sign a 3-year extension with the Colts this week. And so I do expect him to get the lion's share of the carries here. I do expect Minshew to be very serviceable as a starter going forward. I did a quick Google in the background when you were speaking, but it is recommended for a grade 3 AC separation to be immobilized for 4 to 6 weeks, and then return to activity or play is in about 8 to 10 weeks. So Richardson could be out a lot longer than 4 weeks with this injury. So it's just something to keep in the back of our minds right now, because they did announce that it was a grade 3 AC joint, and it's just something to pay attention to. If surgery is an option for a grade 3, it's 4 to 6 months that he would be out. So this could potentially end Anthony Richardson's season, but at the very least, at least 6 weeks, I'm going to say that we're going to be without Anthony Richardson right now. So just something to keep in mind as we bull forward here in the season. Anyone with Anthony Richardson should be finding a backup plan for at least the next handful of games.
So if the Titans lose to the Ravens and the Falcons before the deadline, do you think that they give up on the season and trade, or do you think they hold on?
Is the Falcons on the road or at home?
You would ask me that. So both of them are home games. So Baltimore at home and Atlanta at home.
Man, I think they beat Atlanta at home, because we were just talking about Ritter's undefeated streak at home. But if they do lose both of those games, they do have to consider selling. But I do think a huge part of what convinced DeAndre Hopkins to come to them was that Ryan Tannehill would be throwing him the ball. So they do have to keep that in mind as well, because he did sign a 2-year deal, and that could hinder their ability to get free agents in the future, especially if they might have made him promises behind the scenes of who might be throwing him the ball.
Let me just break this down for you. So the next game is Baltimore, then it's bye week, then it's Atlanta. Both of those are home games. If they lose both of those games, the next games are at Pittsburgh, at Tampa, at Jacksonville, then versus Carolina, versus Indy, at Miami, versus Houston, versus Seattle, at Houston, and then versus Jacksonville. I think that is most likely games they're going to lose most of those games. So if they are 3-5, I don't think that they're going to make the playoffs at that point. Like, it would be a tremendous struggle to limp into the playoffs. So I think they would consider selling Tannehill. They consider selling Henry. They'd even consider selling Hopkins. Like you said, Hopkins wouldn't want to be there. He'd want to go to a contender. So I think that would be an interesting rebuilding option for them, because they could clear out. Like, I don't think the cap penalties would be that severe. At least they could handle it this year. And then next year they'd have a lot of cap. They'd get a lot of picks in return, and they'd have a high draft pick going in to next year. So I think that's possible. I don't think most teams want to blow up their team. Even like Tennessee has been a team that's fought back before. Like, they've had a losing record and fought back and made the playoffs before. That has happened. But that's just such a challenging schedule now that the season's played out, and some of these teams look tougher than we thought. So, I mean, that's a really, really tough schedule, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we've spent enough time on the Titans and the Colts. Not that they're the two most exciting teams in the league right now, but
I will save my Colts stuff for next episode.
Yes. We have a better topic for you right now. It was the Bengals at the Cardinals, and I had picked the Cardinals to win this game, and I was dead wrong. How do you feel? How do you feel about this game now that we've watched it? And how do you feel about these teams?
I felt like the Cardinals were in it for a while, but Josh Dobbs did not look that great. Since his defense, they show up every now and then. Like, they have the pieces to have a good defense, and they came through against the Cardinals. And before the season, that would seem like a no-brainer, but the way the Cardinals have played, that wasn't a given. Granted, James Conner got hurt. I think James Conner would have helped the Cardinals, especially keep possession. Um, so that affected them, in my opinion. Although Amari did step up as the backup. Burrow played a lot better. I still don't want to see Burrow throw 46 times in a game. Mixon had an okay game, but it wasn't very efficient. And Jamar Chase looks like the only person in as a receiving option that's worthwhile holding on to because no one else has done much. If you had a PPR league, Tyler Boyd was startable. He was usable, but not great. I think the Cardinals, though, I've been impressed that on only 15 completions for Dobbs, that Marquise Brown and Rondale Moore have had usable weeks. I think consecutively a little bit. Ertz didn't really do much this one. I was annoyed Michael Wilson didn't do much in this week after getting 2 touchdowns last week. I was kind of annoyed with his lack of usage, and he didn't even get a ball thrown to him until like the last 3 minutes of the game. So I don't know what's up with that, but I expect that to be corrected going forward. Um, I'm just waiting to see what happens with Kyler Murray if they bring him back as a starter, because with this week you can kind of justify it because Josh Jobs didn't do that well. But hopefully Joe Burrow is on his way to being 100% back. I still think he's probably like 80% back, but 80% of Joe Burrow is still one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah, he looked really healthy here. So I don't know how he's getting healthy during the season that he couldn't do during preseason. So just interesting how he's able to get healthy while playing, but in the time off he wasn't able to get healthy enough because he did tweak it at one point early in the first 2 weeks. But it does look like the Bengals and the Cardinals might be who we thought they were. We thought the Bengals would be a playoff contender. We thought the Cardinals would be a team that would be descending and rebuilding a little bit, especially without Kyler. Burrow is ascending as Josh Dobbs does come back down to earth, and there is a possibility that that you were correct on Josh Dobbs, and Josh Dobbs just took the world by storm the first couple of weeks because they didn't know what to expect or what to look for, and he might be as mediocre as you said he was in the preseason. So just something to look out for, and it does seem like they'll be turning the reins over to Kyler Murray at some point here in the near future. Chase is back. Chase put up 3 touchdowns, was it? And so that was big. And then your boy, James Conner, got injured. He's injured every year. He misses a few games every year. But this one does seem a little bit to be more serious because they did put him on injured reserve today as well. So any idea who could carry the load for the Cardinals going forward?
It looks like it's going to be Amari is the number 1 backup, next man up. I would think that they'd want to bring in another running back as well, whether that's a free agent or trade or someone that's already on a roster. I don't know, but I wouldn't rely solely on him, although he did play well in relief of Connor.
Hey, is Trey Sermon available from Indianapolis?
I think now that Jonathan Taylor is back and re-signed, I think he probably is.
Just a good inside joke on
Yep.
on Trey Sermon that everyone thought that he was going to be the next big thing, and he has not been the next big thing just yet. But
All right.
we can move forward to Trey Sermon's former team, the Eagles at the Rams. Now, before we get kicked off with this game here, I do want to notate that Van Jefferson has been traded from the Rams to the Falcons, where he does get a little bit of a fresh start there. I don't expect him to be a fantasy contributor this year, but I do expect him to fly off of waiver wires this week because he'll be a big name that people picked up on with the trade this week. What were your thoughts on this game here as the Eagles did beat the Rams?
So I felt like Kyron Williams is who I thought he was. I don't think he is an RB1. I know his scoring for the first 4 weeks has put him there, but I don't think that he's reliable enough for that. He is RB2, RB3, flex position. He doesn't really have any competition, but he seemed like he took a step back this week, granted against a good Philadelphia defense, even missing one of their best D linemen. Swift hasn't been as good of late, but he's still the number 1 actual running back for the Eagles, although Jalen Hurts eats into his running back stats all the time with his rushing prowess. A.J. Brown had an overall good week for fantasy, but he seemed to struggle in some instances in this matchup. Devontae Smith has not been that great of late. Dallas Goedert looks like he's back. Puka and Kupp, we now know, can in fact coexist, and Kupp is 100% back, it seems like. Tutu Atwell took the back seat. Also, Higbee took a little bit of a backseat in this one as well, but they liked those four enough where they were willing to part with Van Jefferson, who has disappointed this year. Like you said, I don't expect Van Jefferson to do much with the Falcons unless the Falcons trade for another quarterback at some point that will throw the ball more and spread it out to the receivers more so than the tight ends and running backs. But he looks like a good real NFL trade, less so than fantasy trade. I expect both of these offenses to be fairly good for the rest of the year and have a lot of fantasy relevance.
Right, absolutely. The Rams look really good this year, though. I mean, overall, they were in on the Jonathan Taylor sweepstakes in the beginning, but now Jonathan Taylor obviously re-signed with the Colts, so that's done and over with, and I don't expect to hear anything about Jonathan Taylor moving forward. Hurts ran the ball the most, but Swift didn't look as good this week on the ground game either, which is something that they're going to either have to go back to Gainwell, or they're going to have to, or Swift's going to have to be a little bit better on the ground going forward, especially against the Rams, whose defense is not as good as in the past years right now. They did seem like they were targeting Goddard very early, but that really hurt Devonta Smith, and that will be interesting next week because I do believe that Devonta Smith will be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease next week, and you can mark that on your calendars to double check for next week. But I do think that he's a guy that, well, he didn't do well this week. He's a guy that you want to fire up no matter what next week and just give him a shot next week.
Okay, let's move on to the Kansas City Chiefs at Minnesota. This is a matchup that I went against the grain and picked Minnesota, and it certainly looked like in the third quarter, Minnesota might have upset the Chiefs, but without Justin Jefferson, once he was out, they just kind of fell apart, and they were pretty crappy in the fourth quarter. So I don't think that that everything is going smoothly. I don't know if it's Kirk Cousins' fault. I don't know if it's the offensive line's fault. I don't know if if it's the system, the defense. I don't know what it is, but they seem very broken. And right now, I don't really see a pathway for them to make the playoffs without Justin Jefferson, who might miss some time. I don't know if they're even going to have that much of a fighting chance because their best wide receiver, Jordan Addison, outside of Jefferson, is not a very physical receiver, and I think he's going to struggle with man coverage. He already has through the season. He's one of those guys that's better as the wide receiver too, and I don't know if he can be the guy while Jefferson's out. So I'm really worried about that team. If they don't have the passing game going well for them, they aren't going to have much of a rushing game. And whether that's Madison, whether that's Akers, that doesn't bode well for them. I could see them giving up at some point if they're 1-6 at the trade deadline, 1-7, whatever it is. I could see them moving on from potentially Cousins if he agrees to a trade, or maybe some of the other positions there. And that would be kind of tough. That would be kind of hard to work out. May not come into fruition at all, but it's hard to see them make the playoffs at this point without like a miracle happening. For Kansas City's side, it seemed like overcompensation from the refs that they called so many penalties on the offensive lineman, I think Jawan, for false starting so many times, for starting off and starting his blocks way too soon. They called him out for it the week before, the last several weeks before, and they blew the whistle on him so many times that the Chiefs offense really couldn't get anything going at all in this matchup. And I just think this offense has been pretty dysfunctional. It seems like they're going into a full season hangover after the Super Bowl, and it's hard to see them be a top tier team that we're accustomed to this season. Granted, they'll probably have everything worked out by the time playoffs come around, and they probably will squeak in the playoffs. So they'll still be good, but we're not seeing the excellence that we're used to seeing. And I don't know if it's a post Super Bowl hangover or if it's their offensive coordinator leaving, or they just are finally facing the real struggles of not having a legitimate wide receiver. I don't know, but they don't look great either. So I think that they won't have that great of a record by the time the season's over. And there's really, to me, only Pacheco and Mahomes and Kelsey are the only ones that are usable.
Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, it's okay to know who your usable talent is, but don't count the Chiefs out for trading for somebody also, for a wide receiver or anything like that. And also, with Jefferson out, I do think Addison's stock is up, and I think this really could help him grow to being that wide receiver opposite of Jefferson when Jefferson's back. But the trading Cousins thing, like, it makes sense, but it also doesn't at the same time because Jefferson's not signing his long-term deal because he doesn't know who his quarterback's going to be, and he will not do that until he knows who his quarterback is. So Minnesota needs to walk really lightly on this, because once you get rid of Cousins, then who is your quarterback?
Yeah, well, it looks to me like it's going to be Caleb Williams.
How though? They're not going to get the 101. I don't think.
If they only have one victory, I think they'll be the number one team.
Right, right. But they do have to play Green Bay with the unimpressive Jordan Love, which we'll get to. They do have to play the Bears, who've been up and mostly down this year, and they did have one up game against the Commanders, which we do have to start wondering about the Commanders. So there are pieces there that might prevent them from getting that 1.01. It's so hard to get that 1.01 pick. You have to trade for it
Yeah.
like Carolina did last year.
I mean, they could get Drake May too, so it's entirely
Absolutely.
possible. But we can move on to it looks like the New York Jets at the Denver Broncos. And Jeff, I know this is the matchup that you would love to talk about, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so my boy, Brees Hall, he is back, and Brees Hall, that is the whole entire sentence. Like, I don't need to say anything more, anything less. I believe he had 177 yards on the ground. He is back, and he's been explosive even when he was under a snap count. And now his snap count is lifted, and now I expect these higher output performances. And Jaleel McLaughlin looked good in a spot start for the Broncos. Javonte was out. Does look like Javonte will be back for this next week. But the Broncos at this point do not look good. And they lost to the coach that Sean Payton ripped in the offseason, as Nathaniel Hackett's offense did put up more points than the Denver Broncos did. And they could be the first team that actually hits that fire sale status. And I do think that they're going to need to do that in order to kind of reboot this franchise, because it does seem like the mentality of this team is really struggling right now. And Sean Payton is probably starting to lose this locker room, which means that these players need to be cycled through right now. The only player that I don't know what they do with is Russell Wilson. So here's the thing with Russ. His extension does not pick up until next year. So cutting him, trading him, anything with him is going to destroy your cap over the next 2 to 3 seasons. So the cap is very manageable and maneuverable, but in a situation like this where you sign someone to a big extension, you've given them their bonus, that all hits your cap if you get rid of him. So they're kind of stuck together at this point. One thing that isn't being discussed that I would actually be interested in, and I thought about it a little bit this afternoon, is what if Russ was traded to Minnesota for Kirk Cousins? It resolves Peyton's Russ problem. It gives Justin Jefferson a quarterback that can get him the ball. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really have any other answers than that. And the caps kind of would cross each other out. So like you're taking dead cap, but you're not really adding more cap to your team. So it was just an interesting thought of the Minnesota's done with Kirk and Denver's done with Russ, and you just swap them, get them into different spots. Imagine Kirk Cousins with Sean Payton.
The thing is, Kirk Cousins has that no trade clause, I should say. I don't know if he'd agree to go to Denver. That's the only hang up.
Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, a couple good tight ends. I mean, he would have weapons there and a good to great, potentially Hall of Fame head coach.
But would he want to be in the same division as Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert? I would say probably not.
No, because I think those are probably two of the top 4 quarterbacks in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I think the only situation right now that he would 100% sign on to the deal is if he somehow was going to the 49ers, which I think there's no way that happens financially, and especially not with Brock Purdy playing as well as he's playing. But being reunited with Shanahan, I think, would be the ideal situation. I don't see him wanting to play for Denver. I don't think Jeudy or Sutton are top tier weapons. I don't think that the tight ends they have are top tier weapons. I don't think the running backs they have are top tier running backs yet. I don't know. I don't know.
Right? It's an interesting scenario, but it's all hypothetical right now. But the Broncos are heading downward. The Jets, Zach Wilson is improving. Like, I don't know how else to say it than that, but he has shown some real good fire the last few weeks.
Yeah. Man, I almost think. Sorry, I'm still thinking about the trades. I almost think it will never happen. But Kirk Cousins to the Cowboys for Dak, I think that would be interesting as well.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the Spider-Man meme pointing back and forth at each other. I feel like they're a lot of this. They're in the same class of quarterback.
I think Cousins is better though.
Maybe, but yeah, it's we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I don't foresee those both happening at this exact juncture either.
All right, well, we talked about the Cowboys and 49ers. Let's go ahead and talk about their matchup. So let's move on to the Sunday night matchup. I don't think I skipped anything. Okay. And man, 49ers look legit. Cowboys, like I've been saying, when the game is on the line and Dak has it on his shoulders, he has not been good. He has not been good at all. Only CeeDee Lamb has really been the only usable passing option with Dak, which is very concerning because a lot of people like Michael Gallup, a lot of people like Brandon Cooks, Ferguson. Those guys haven't really been able to be showcased because Dak's been very terrible. But I expected that the 49ers would have more of a ground game. They kind of did because they got so far ahead that they started using Jordan Mason uh, as a running back and resting Christian McCaffrey at a certain point. So that was nice. Tony Pollard didn't really do much in this matchup. His receptions kind of saved a little bit of his fantasy outlook, but George Kittle making up all of his points in one matchup with 3 touchdowns helped me
He
in a
almost
couple
screwed me
leagues.
in my guillotine league.
I know. I know he almost screwed you over, but he helped me in 2 of my leagues. So I appreciate the George Kittle explosion. Brandon Ayuk is good. Debo Samuel's good. I think you have a note here. Start all 49ers at all times, basically. But man, the 49ers look almost unstoppable. The Niners, the Eagles, the Lions, they look really, really good on the NFC side. And it's starting to look like the NFC might be better than the AFC this year, or at least record wise anyway, with some of these teams. But Jeff, how did you feel about this matchup?
Oh man, Niners are all must starts right now, and they scored 30 points in at least 30 points in all of their games this year. So that's really impressive because they are they have a lot of firepower. As you mentioned, Kittle finally exploded. Purdy's probably a must start at this point. Ayuk is just balling this year. Samuel, CMC. I did realize, and I think might have made mistakes in previous weeks. The Ayuk got his 5th-year option picked up, and I guess I didn't realize that, or I reported it and then I forgot about it. But so they do have Ayuk going into next year. He's not really entering a contract year right now, so that's really big for the 49ers because they could actually bring back their entire team around Purdy next year. So this is not like just a 1-year wonder. This could be a 2-year easy hit. So we'll see what happens with that. But Dak, Pollard, Lamb, all unimpressive right now. So we need to kind of figure out what's wrong with this offense because this offense was much better last year under Kellen Moore. And even with Dak making mistakes, like it's okay to make mistakes. Just put up fantasy points. Come on. Like that's kind of what we're looking for here. Put up points too, I guess. And we'll see what happens with that. I did want to rewind for 1 second here to the Broncos. I did see just now that Jerry Jeudy started following all of the Carolina Panthers. So I don't know if you're going to hear it here first, but Jerry Jeudy might be headed to the Carolina Panthers sometime in the next 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks.
Man, I'm going to be looking for that, and I will be monitoring my phone. So that would be quite interesting if that happens during our recording. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll probably report it between this podcast and the next podcast. So we'll see what happens. But when it comes down to the Cowboys, I think you said the difference, between this year and last year, is they kicked Kellen Moore to the curb, and Justin Herbert has benefited from it. Dak Prescott has not. So I think that if they continue to struggle with how talented this roster is, I think Kevin McCarthy might be put on the hot seat. It just depends on how the year goes. But I'd be concerned. Outside of that, man, I think the Cowboys are still a playoff team. I think the 49ers are a top contender for the Super Bowl. I'm starting every 49ers player. I am very worried about the fantasy relevance of the Cowboys, though. I think it might just be defensive close games for a lot of these games.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Cowboys defense isn't even looking that impressive right now. So that's another issue that just popped up. And I don't know if that's because of Trey Diggs, but it's just an issue that popped up recently. And they're not a must start defense at this exact juncture. Do you want to hop to the last game of the week?
Let's do it. Let's move on to the Green Bay Packers at the Las Vegas Raiders. And although we picked Green Bay for this matchup, we did break down the team comparison, and they were almost identical teams, other than some big plays, and a lot of that could be luck and scheme and just not having enough film on Jordan Love. But the Raiders playing at home, the Raiders trying to make another statement game that they're not one of the worst teams in the league. Um, they showed out in a very close, ugly game. But a lot of the prediction for us, at least for me, I would assume for you, is there was a chance Aaron Jones was going to play. There was a chance Devontae Adams wasn't going to play. And for me, that kind of swayed my opinion on that outlook. But man, Jordan Love came crashing back down to earth. I know we get caught up. Everyone gets caught up. Us, you guys out there on short-term success, and I think that Jordan Love's early success made us think that he potentially is a better quarterback than what we have thought about before the season started. I think that he is a little bit better than what I thought he'd be, but I don't think he is a top quarterback anymore. I don't think that he will end up as a top 15 or 16 quarterback in the league. I think he's bottom third, but I don't think he's all the way at the bottom. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think both of those guys are oddly very similar, but Jimmy Garoppolo is working with a little bit more star power with Adams and Myers and Jacobs, so I think that benefits him. This may have been a different outcome if they had Aaron Jones fully healthy. So both these teams are in a similar position, in my opinion, and I expect them both to finish with a similar record. Jeff, how do you feel about this matchup?
Oh man, this was not one of my favorite Monday night games, other than I needed Jacoby Myers to go off like he did to survive my guillotine league, which if you haven't played in a guillotine league, I recommend everyone give one a shot next year. It's where you play with 18 teams and one team gets chopped each week and all their players go back to the waiver wire. Very fun. Very stressful though, because you don't want to be that lowest scoring team that goes home that week, and that was almost me this week. I think Myers is a must start, along with Adams and Jacobs going forward. Love regressing, as you had mentioned, is kind of surprising, but you might have been right about him. Do you think it's because he's bad, or the injuries have finally mounted up on the Packers?
I don't think he's bad. I think he's mediocre, and I think there's now going into the game. There's 4 weeks of film on him. Now there's 5 weeks. I think that Aaron Jones being hurt and their best offensive lineman being hurt has certainly affected him. I do think that Christian Watson and Dobbs will be okay going forward if they can figure out some pass protection. But I just think he's a middling quarterback at best at this point. I don't think he's the worst quarterback. He's certainly not going to be a top quarterback. I think that they could potentially do better, but they have him for, I think, 2 years. So they'll see how he is. I don't think they're going to be in a position to draft a quarterback this year, though. So they will have to see what he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think he's good enough to carry talent. And I think these injuries have mounted up. And he's really missing Aaron Jones big time, someone to take the pressure off of him. But he has Watson back, who's now a focal point. I do believe Jaden Reed can safely be dropped as long as Watson and Dobbs are healthy and Musgrave's healthy. I just find him to be a roster clogger at the end of benches right now. So if you want to go take a stab on a Curtis Samuel or KJ Osborne or somebody else that could potentially get a more larger target share than Jaden Reed, it's safe to be able to drop him at this point after a really good start to the year, and he was really usable the first 3 weeks of the year with Watson out. But that's all I have about that matchup.
Yep, but keep an eye out on news on Judy in the Panthers. He might be a buy low candidate if he ends up getting moved there, because he would most likely improve with the Panthers just from game script. So keep an eye on that too.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
That does it for this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for downloading or listening to this episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle at N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, and Threads. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.